A servant falls in love with his mistress. The mistress is much older than him, although she had 2 sons, and her husband is always busy with work. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. The movie opens with a house located by the beach. Inside the house lives a man named Ted, along with his wife Marian and their daughter Ruth. On the walls of the house are a few framed photos showing 2 boys, photos of Ted and Marian's sons who died in a car crash a few years ago. Marian, their mother, still hasn't recovered from the tragedy and has been in depression ever since. One day, Ted's daughter Ruth is walking in the house gallery when her eyes catch the photographs on the wall. She asks her father about them, but Ted tells her not to think about those pictures. They were pictures of her dead brothers. Ruth insists that her brothers are still alive, but her father tells her it's time to forget about them. Ted is a children's book author and an artist. He's always busy with his work, so he has hired a woman named Alice to look after Ruth. Ruth is very curious and often stares at the photos in the gallery, believing that one day her brothers will come back to her. One day, Ted asks his wife Marian to go out with him, but Marian is so deep in depression that she doesn't respond to him at all. Later that night, while Ted is sleeping, Ruth comes to him and says she heard some voices. She thinks her brothers were calling her. Ted takes her to the gallery to help her let go of the illusion. He shows her the pictures again and gently comforts her, then brings her back to bed. While putting her to sleep, he tells her stories about her brothers. After Ruth falls asleep, Ted gets back to writing his book. The next morning, Marian goes out to pick up a boy named Eddie. She meets him and they talk, getting to know each other. Through their conversation, we learn that Ted quickly hired Eddie as his assistant. Eddie also mentions that he will be Ted's driver too, as Ted's license had been suspended due to drinking. So Ted had no choice but to hire Eddie. Eddie hopes to learn about writing while staying there. Marian brings Eddie to Ted's house and leaves. When Eddie arrives, he meets Ted, who then introduces him to a doctor named Rumi. Later, when they go inside the house, Eddie tells Ted that he's already read many of Ted's books, and his favorite is The Door in the Floor. Eddie shares that he loves writing too, and wants to learn how to write books from Ted. Ted starts opening up to Eddie and tells him that he's not happy with his wife Marian. That's why he stays here by the beach, and he's rented another house in town for Marian to live in separately. After that, Ted explains Eddie's job responsibilities. He tells him that he'll need to travel back and forth to town frequently to meet his wife, and that the job might be a bit demanding. When Eddie meets Alice, she begins asking questions about him. Eddie explains who he is and why he's working there. Alice then leaves with Ruth. The next morning, Ted is seen with a woman. It turns out the woman is there to please Ted. Ted, already tempted, begins drinking and watches her lustfully. Meanwhile, Eddie sees Ruth standing in front of the photograph, talking to it as if having a conversation, but he says nothing. That night, Eddie goes to a movie with Marian. During the movie, he keeps staring at her, though Marian has no idea he's watching her with affectionate eyes. After the movie, when they leave the theater, Marian asks Eddie how he liked the film, but Eddie, lost in her presence, doesn't have much of an answer. As they return home, it's already dawn. Marian says she enjoyed watching the movie with Eddie and invites him to dinner. Eddie happily agrees. During dinner, the two seem to enjoy each other's company. Eddie starts to feel a strange attraction toward Marian. One day, while Marian is walking along the beach, Eddie quietly watches her from a distance. It's as if Eddie is being pulled toward her. In the house, he secretly looks at Marian's clothes, but just then, Marian walks in and catches him. Embarrassed, Eddie apologizes. Marian gently tells him that at his age, such feelings are normal and not something to be ashamed of. She says she's actually glad that someone thinks about her that way. They begin to talk more, discussing various things, including love. Slowly, they seem to grow closer to each other. Now, Ted and Marian have started sleeping in separate places. At night, Marian sleeps in the beach house while Ted goes to the rented house in town. Eddie also starts sleeping at Marian's house, and their meetings become more frequent. One evening, Marian and Eddie go out for dinner again. During dinner, Marian tells Eddie that he's a good guy for his age. Hearing this, Eddie tries to make Marian laugh by telling her a joke, but she doesn't laugh. Then Marian teasingly asks if Eddie is in a relationship with Alice. She's clearly trying to find out who Eddie actually likes. But from Eddie's response, she figures out that he doesn't have a girlfriend. Playfully, Marian says, "Then why don't you ask Alice out on a date?" But Eddie says, "She's not like me." Marian tells him that Alice isn't a good woman and that she doesn't take proper care of her daughter, Ruth. Marian still loves her husband, but she hasn't been able to get over the death of her sons. Because of that, she's also been unable to truly love her daughter, Ruth. After saying this, she shows Eddie the pictures of her sons in the gallery. It's nighttime, and they both go to their rooms to sleep, but Eddie can't fall asleep. His mind is filled with thoughts of Marian. Suddenly, Marian walks into Eddie's room. Her mood seems different romantic. She asks Eddie, "Have you ever been in a relationship with someone?" Marian looked like she was trying to seduce Eddie. It was as if she was burning with desire. She spoke sweetly, affectionately, and then she began to undress. Eddie didn't want to miss the moment. He already understood what was in Marian's heart. They got close. That night, they made love. It was the first time in years that Marian had truly felt loved. Afterward, Eddie told her how good it felt to be with her. The next morning, the two of them went out for a walk on the beach. Ted noticed them walking together, but wasn't entirely sure something was going on between them. Ted, always caught up in his own work, didn't have the time or space to think about such things. He was busy working on his next book. Later, at a party with Ted, Eddie noticed that Ted had a habit of flirting with young women. It became clear to Eddie why Ted didn't love Marian. On their way home, Ted said to Eddie, "I saw Marian smiling today after a long time." Eddie didn't respond, but Ted was starting to suspect that Marian might be in love with Eddie. Eddie, however, played it smart and dodged Ted's suspicions. The love between Eddie and Marian continued to grow. They spent more and more time together, but Eddie also made sure to do his assistant duties properly. He didn't want Ted to find out about the affair. Eddie even played tennis with Ted and made sure to lose. He didn't want to make Ted feel threatened or suspicious. The next morning, as Eddie was heading somewhere with Ted, Ted confronted him about his relationship with Marian. Ted said, "I want to divorce Marian, but I need your help. I want custody of my daughter, Ruth." Back at home, Eddie tells Marian that Ted isn't a good man, but Marian defends him, saying that Ted is actually a good father and takes good care of Ruth. She says his only flaw is his obsession with painting, which she absolutely hates. She explains that in the early days of their marriage, Ted used to paint portraits of her, and that made her deeply uncomfortable. Later that night, when Eddie and Marian are together, Eddie brings up her sons. The moment he asks, Marian becomes emotional, and memories of her deceased sons overwhelm her. She starts crying. That night, Eddie is showing Ruth all the photographs. Ruth asks if she can take one picture to her room. Marian agrees, but Ruth accidentally drops the picture, and a piece of broken glass cuts her finger. Eddie and Marian quickly take her to the doctor. When Ted finds out, he gets very angry at Eddie for giving Ruth the photo. He scolds Eddie, saying it was Marian's job, not his. That night, Ruth has another terrifying dream and wakes up crying. Ted feels bad and tries hard to comfort her, but nothing works. Then Marian comes in and calms Ruth down instantly. Seeing this, Ted realizes that after their divorce, Ruth should stay with Marian because she's truly happy with her. The next day, Marian suddenly starts crying again. Memories of her son flood back. Eddie tries to calm her down, but Marian tells him she's planning to leave soon, and this time she won't come back. That same day, Ted asks Eddie to deliver all his paintings to Evelyn's house. He's done with her now and wants to move on. When Eddie arrives at Evelyn's house, she gets angry. She had invited Ted over, but he never showed up. She tells Eddie that Ted must come see her on Friday. Then, in frustration, Evelyn accidentally locks herself out of the house. Eddie ends up breaking one of her windows to get back inside. That evening, Marian tells Eddie, "On Friday, when you drop Ted off at Evelyn's house, don't bring him back." She says, "If Ted has to walk home alone, it'll take him longer. And during that time, I'll take all the boys' pictures and leave this place for good." The next day, Eddie drives Ted to Evelyn's house. Evelyn is furious. She tears up all the paintings Ted had sent her. Eddie drops Ted off and drives back home. Marian then sends Ruth with Eddie to the doctor to get her stitches removed. Marian says, "If Ruth is here, I won't be able to leave." Meanwhile, Evelyn follows Ted in her car. Ted narrowly escapes by running down to the beach. After Ruth's stitches are removed, Eddie stops by the photo shop to pick up a picture that had been broken earlier. Marian had sent it in for repair. Eddie asks for the picture, knowing Ruth will be furious if she returns home and doesn't find either her mother or the photo. But the manager refuses to give Eddie the picture. So Eddie writes a letter explaining everything. He tells the manager the whole story, including the affair between him and Marian. After reading the letter, the manager comes out from the back, clearly moved by the story. The shopkeeper finally gives Eddie the photo. Meanwhile, Ted rushes to a bookstore where he has many fans. He starts signing autographs for them. There, his eyes catch two young women who are huge fans of his. He asks them if they can drop him off at his home. Instead, the girls take him to their own house first, where he changes his clothes. After that, Ted tells the girls and their mother that he wants to paint them, and they happily agree. With their help, Ted returns home quickly. As he arrives, he sees Marian leaving. He turns to look at her, but says nothing. Marian quietly walks away, this time forever moving to New York. Sometime later, Eddie returns with Ruth. Ted is furious and slaps Eddie, even though it wasn't Eddie's fault. Angry, Eddie punches Ted back, something Marian had told him to do if Ted ever tried to hurt him. Eddie tells Ted that Marian is gone for good, and she took all the pictures of their sons with her. Ted now has no photographs left of his boys. Shocked and heartbroken, Ted fires Eddie and tells him to leave immediately. After Marian leaves, handling Ruth becomes very difficult. Even the babysitter, Alice, ends up quitting. Ted becomes deeply saddened and later later opens up to Eddie about the tragic accident that took their sons' lives. He explains that they were out one night. Marian, Ted, and their two sons all were drunk. The younger son, who was inexperienced at driving, was behind the wheel. Snow had built up on the headlights and taillights, but Ted had forgotten to clear it. Because of poor visibility, their car collided with a truck on the highway. Both sons died in the crash. Ted says they had Ruth afterward, hoping it would ease the pain, but it didn't help. Eddie feels terrible hearing this, but he still can't understand how a mother could leave her own daughter behind. The next day, Evelyn's servant comes to meet Ted and informs him that Evelyn has fired him. Hearing this, Ted hires him as his driver and then hires his wife to be Ruth's cook and babysitter. After that, Eddie says goodbye to Ted and leaves to go back home. Ted's new driver and his wife begin taking good care of Ruth. And with that, the film comes to an end.